I never believed in the supernatural, not in ghosts or spirits or the strange things people claim to see in the deep woods. My world was one of tangible things. The ache in my joints, the weight of a hammer, the bite of winter wind. That all changed in the autumn I lost everything that mattered. My daughter, Sarah, and her husband, Mark, died in a head-on collision on a rain-slicked mountain road. One moment, they were a family. The next, a statistic in a state patrol report. And just like that, I was alone with their infant daughter, Lily. Me, a 61-year-old grandfather, with nothing but a meager social security check and a drafty cabin at the base of the mountains. I was drowning in grief, utterly clueless as to how I was going to survive, let alone raise a child. But something else, something beyond all comprehension, had different plans for us. It was October when they perished. The air had that crisp, mournful edge that signals the end of warmth. The crash happened on a wet curve just outside our valley, a place I'd driven 1,000 times. One moment Sarah was driving her family home from visiting me, Lily strapped safely in the back, and the next a delivery van hydroplaned on a patch of wet leaves and crossed into their lane. The state patrol officer who came to my door had a practiced, tired look in his eyes. He told me they died on impact, as if the swiftness of their end was meant to be some kind of consolation. It wasn't. It was just a different kind of horror. Lily survived. Her rear-facing car seat, a fortress of plastic and foam, had saved her. She was only 7 months old, a tiny being too young to comprehend that her parents were never returning, too young to know anything except that the universe had suddenly become a darker, colder, emptier place. Child Protective Services came a few days later, a kind but weary woman who asked if I could take her. Of course I said yes. The word left my mouth before my brain could even process the terrifying implications. What else could I say? She was my granddaughter, my last living link to Sarah, my own flesh and blood. But agreeing to take her and knowing how to manage it were two entirely different realities. I had raised Sarah 35 years ago, but I was a young man then, full of vigor, and my wife, Martha, was still alive. We were a team. Now I was alone, surviving on a fixed income that barely covered the property taxes and the propane bill. My cabin, which had seemed rustic and charming for decades, now revealed itself for what it was: old and failing. The furnace was a temperamental beast that coughed out lukewarm air with a groan. The window frames had shrunk over the years, letting in drafts that snaked across the floor whenever the wind blew. And winter, the true, unforgiving mountain winter, was approaching. My cabin sat at the very end of the line, where the county-maintained road gave up and the wilderness began. Most people stayed away from this area, calling it too remote, too far from the conveniences of civilization. But I had lived here for 45 years and had never known trouble. The mountains had always felt like a silent, steadfast companion, something quiet and sheltering. I never imagined they would become something more. The first weeks after Lily came to live with me were the most difficult of my existence. The grief was a physical weight, pressing down on my chest until I could barely breathe. I wept every night after she fell asleep in the old crib I'd hastily retrieved from the attic. I wept for Sarah, for her stolen future, for the kind young man she had married. I wept for the life this tiny infant would never have with her parents, and I wept because I was terrified. Terrified I wouldn't have enough money for diapers and formula, which were shockingly expensive. Terrified I wouldn't have the energy to do this alone, to wake up every 3 hours for feedings, to soothe her inexplicable cries. Terrified I would fail her, just as I felt I had failed everyone else in my life. November came and brought the first serious cold. The temperature plummeted below freezing and stayed there, locking the ground in a sheath of ice. My heating bill doubled, then tripled. I started wearing 4 layers of clothing inside the cabin and kept Lily wrapped in so many blankets. She looked like a little bundled cocoon. I fed her the bottles, changed her diapers, and attempted to make her smile, but inside I was suffocating. The grief was a slow poison, and the terror of not having enough was a constant, gnawing hunger. Then came the night that transformed everything. It was 3 weeks before Christmas. A relentless, freezing sleet was coming down, and the wind screamed through the gaps in my old windows like a banshee. I had just put Lily to bed, her soft breathing the only peaceful sound in the world, when I heard something outside. At first, I dismissed it as the wind knocking a dead limb against the side of the cabin, a common enough sound. But then I heard it again. A heavy, deliberate thump, then another, then footsteps crunching through the ice-crusted snow. My heart hammered against my ribs. We were 2 miles from the nearest neighbor. Nobody came out here after dark, especially not in conditions like this. My first thought was an animal, a mountain lion, or perhaps a bear, driven by hunger to scavenge near the cabin. But the footsteps sounded too heavy, too bipedal, too purposeful. They sounded impossibly like a person. I crept to the main room window, my hands trembling, and pulled back the heavy wool curtain just a fraction of an inch. What I saw made my blood freeze in my veins. There was something standing in my yard, something enormous. It was at least 9 feet tall, a hulking silhouette against the swirling sleet, covered from head to toe in thick, dark fur. Its shoulders were as wide as a refrigerator. The Bigfoot stood perfectly motionless in the storm, its head slightly cocked as if it were listening, just staring at my cabin. Its eyes caught the weak light from my porch lamp and reflected it back, a pair of glowing discs, just as an animal's eyes do at night. But this was no animal, not any animal I had ever seen or read about. I stumbled back from the window, pressing my hand over my mouth to stifle a cry. My mind was spinning, a frantic carousel of disbelief and terror. Was I seeing things? Was I so exhausted and grief-stricken that my mind had finally snapped, conjuring monsters from the storm? But no, the vision was too solid, too real. I could see the sleet settling on its matted fur. I could see the faint plume of its breath misting in the frigid air. I could see its massive chest rise and fall with each slow, deliberate breath. My first instinct was to protect Lily. I ran to her room and closed the door as quietly as my shaking hands would allow. She was still sleeping, her little chest rising and falling in a peaceful rhythm, oblivious to the nightmare standing in our yard. I stood there in the dark, listening to my own heartbeat thunder in my ears, a frantic drum against the howling wind. Outside, I could hear the Bigfoot moving. I heard it walking along the side of the building, its heavy steps crunching with unnerving clarity. I heard it stop at the back entrance. I heard the doorknob rattle. Panic seized me. I fumbled for my phone to call for help, but my hands were shaking so badly I dropped it. It clattered to the floor, the sound echoing like a gunshot in the tense silence. By the time I picked it up again, the rattling at the door had stopped. The Bigfoot had gone silent. I stood frozen in the dark, every muscle coiled, waiting for the door to burst open or a window to shatter. But nothing happened. After what felt like an eternity but was probably only 30 minutes, I finally worked up the nerve to creep back to the window and look outside again. The Bigfoot was gone. The yard was empty. The only evidence it had been there at all was a set of massive, deep footprints in the ice, leading from the impenetrable darkness of the mountains to my cabin, and then back again. I didn't sleep that night. I sat in a hard-backed chair next to Lily's crib with an old hunting knife in my lap, jumping at every creak of the old cabin, every gust of wind. By morning, I had almost convinced myself it must have been a bear. A very large, very strange bear. Bears sometimes walked on their hind legs. Maybe in the dark and the sleet, my frightened, sleep-deprived mind had twisted the image of an ordinary bear into something impossible. But when the sun came up, casting a weak, watery light over the frozen landscape, I went outside to look at those footprints. They were not bear tracks. They were shaped like human footprints, but 4 times the size, with a distinct arch and 5 discernible toes. They went right up to my back entrance, paused there for some time, and then retreated to the mountains in a straight, unwavering line. That morning, I found something else too. On my back porch, arranged carefully on the top step as if presented for inspection, was a pile of provisions, not garbage or scraps, but real, valuable food. There were a dozen wild mushrooms, the kind I knew to be choice edibles, still fresh despite the brutal cold, arranged in a neat cluster. Next to them were 4 large trout, already cleaned and gutted, their silvery scales shimmering, laid out on a bed of fragrant pine needles. The Bigfoot had left them there during the night. I stood there staring at that food for a long time, trying to make sense of the impossible. This creature, this monster from myth and legend, had terrified me to my core, but it hadn't tried to harm me. It hadn't broken down my door. Instead, the Bigfoot had brought me provisions. Why? I looked at those trout and mushrooms and thought about my nearly empty refrigerator. I thought about how I had been stretching every dollar, skipping meals so I could afford formula for Lily. I thought about the deep, cold fear I had felt that we wouldn't make it through the winter. I took the provisions inside. The trout was firm and fresh, the mushrooms were earthy and delicious, and I cooked them both for breakfast. I felt a strange sense of guilt about it at first, as if I were accepting charity from something I should be running from. But I was hungry, I was desperate, and the food was good. That night, the Bigfoot came back. I was expecting it this time, so I wasn't as afraid. I heard the familiar crunch of footsteps in the ice and went to the window. The Bigfoot was standing in the same spot as before, a silent, colossal sentinel just watching my cabin. This time, with the moon peeking through a break in the clouds, I got a better look at the creature. The Bigfoot was massive, with long, powerful arms that hung almost to its knees and a broad, muscular build. Its fur was a dark, rich brown, almost black in the moonlight, and its face was a strange and compelling mixture of human and ape, with a flat nose, a prominent brow ridge, and deep-set eyes that seemed to hold a profound, aware intelligence. The Bigfoot stood there for perhaps 15 minutes, then turned with a surprising grace for its size and walked back into the mountains. In the morning, there was more food on my porch, more mushrooms, more trout, and this time a wild turkey, already plucked, cleaned, and ready to cook. This continued for weeks. Every few nights, the Bigfoot would come and stand in my yard, a silent observer. Every morning after a visit, I would find food on my porch. I stopped being afraid and started being intensely curious. Who was this creature? What did it want? Why was it helping me? I started leaving my own offerings on the porch. Nothing extravagant, just things I thought the creature might appreciate. A jar of honey from the local farmer's market, a loaf of bread I had baked, an old warm wool blanket that I no longer used. Every morning my offerings were gone, and there was new food in their place. It became a silent, sacred routine, an exchange between us. I would put something out, and the Bigfoot would take it and leave something else. We were communicating without words, building a strange and tentative relationship based on gifts and gestures. My granddaughter was growing during this time, a tiny flower blooming in the harshest of winters. She was crawling now, pulling herself up on furniture, making those babbling sounds that are the precursors to words. She had Sarah's eyes, that same bright, curious intelligence that seemed to take in everything. Watching her grow was a constant, bittersweet ache. Painful because Sarah would never see these milestones. Beautiful because this little girl was thriving, a testament to life's stubborn insistence on continuing despite everything. Babies don't care about your sadness. They need to be fed and changed and entertained and loved. Lily pulled me forward when all I wanted to do was collapse backward into my grief. She gave me a reason to keep going when I felt I had none left, and the Bigfoot kept us alive. Without the food the creature brought, I don't know what would have happened. My social security check barely covered the heating bill and the property taxes. There was nothing left for groceries. But every morning, there was food on my porch, fish and game and wild plants, more than enough to keep us fed. I learned how to prepare things I had never cooked before. I learned which wild plants were edible and which weren't. Guided by the Bigfoot's careful selections, I learned to preserve food for lean times, to smoke meat and dry herbs. The Bigfoot was teaching me how to survive in a way I never had to before. Then winter came in full force. The snow started falling in late December and didn't stop until March. We were buried under several feet of it. The road to the valley became impassable for weeks at a time. The mail carrier couldn't get through. The propane delivery truck couldn't get through. We were completely and utterly cut off from civilization. But we weren't alone. Every morning I would wake up to find that someone had shoveled a path from my front door to the woodshed. Every morning there was a fresh stack of perfectly split firewood piled neatly on the porch. Every morning there was food. The Bigfoot was taking care of us, anticipating our needs, making sure we had everything we required to survive the brutal winter. I never saw the creature during the day. It only came at night, a phantom in the moonlight, but I could feel its presence, a constant watchfulness from the tree line. Sometimes I would look out the window and see a flicker of movement in the deep shadows. Sometimes I would hear the snap of a branch under an enormous weight. Sometimes I would find a single, massive track in the fresh snow, leading right up to my windows, as if the Bigfoot had been standing there, looking in at us, making sure we were safe. I should have been frightened by that, by the thought of this giant creature peering into my home, but I wasn't. The Bigfoot had proven itself to be a protector, not a threat. It was watching over us, and in that brutal, isolating winter when we were so vulnerable, that protection meant everything. One night in January, during the worst blizzard I had ever seen, something happened that changed my understanding of the Bigfoot completely. The wind was so violent it felt like it would tear the cabin from its foundations. The temperature had dropped to 20 below zero. Lily was crying, a thin, miserable wail because she was cold despite all the blankets I had wrapped her in. The fire in the wood stove was roaring, but it couldn't keep up with the Arctic cold seeping through the walls. I was genuinely terrified that we wouldn't survive the night. Then I heard something on the roof. Heavy, careful footsteps moving across the shingles. The Bigfoot was up there doing something. I heard scraping sounds, thumping sounds, and then, after an hour, everything went quiet. When morning came and the storm had finally passed, I went outside to see what had happened. The Bigfoot had covered my entire roof with a thick layer of pine boughs, weaving them together to create an insulation blanket that trapped heat inside. The creature had also piled snow high around the base of the cabin, creating a natural windbreak that blocked the worst of the cold. That night, our cabin had been warmer than it had been in weeks. The Bigfoot had literally saved our lives. After that night, I started talking to the creature. I knew it was out there in the darkness, watching and listening. So I would stand on my porch and speak into the cold night air, telling the Bigfoot about my day, about Lily's progress, about my fears and my hopes. I didn't know if the creature understood my words, but I felt a deep need to acknowledge what it was doing for us, to express my gratitude. And sometimes, just sometimes, I would hear a response, not words, but sounds, a low rumbling call from deep in the mountains, a branch breaking in a specific rhythmic pattern, a series of knocks on a distant tree. The Bigfoot was communicating back in its own way. We were building a relationship, the creature and I, not a human relationship, but something else, something primal and honest, based on mutual care. The Bigfoot protected us and provided for us. I acknowledged the creature and treated it with respect. That was our bond, Spring came eventually, as it always does. The snow melted and the road to the valley opened again. People could get through now. The mail carrier, the propane delivery driver, a few neighbors checking to see if the old man in the remote cabin had survived. They were all amazed that we had made it through such a brutal winter, just me and an infant, all alone. They asked how I had managed it. I just smiled and said we got lucky. I didn't tell them about the Bigfoot. I knew with an instinct I couldn't explain that the creature needed to remain a secret. If people knew about it, they would come looking. Hunters with high-powered rifles, scientists with tranquilizer darts, curiosity seekers with cameras. They would invade these mountains and they would destroy the peace and solitude that the Bigfoot needed to survive. So I kept quiet. I let people think I was some kind of wilderness expert, some tough old mountain man who could survive anything. Better they think that than know the truth. Lily was a year old now, taking her first wobbly steps, saying her first words. She was healthy and happy, a bright spark of life despite the hardship we had endured. And she knew the Bigfoot. She had seen it through the windows enough times that she recognized it. When the creature would appear at the tree line in the evening, she would point her chubby little finger and make an excited sound, a gurgle of recognition. She wasn't afraid. To her, the Bigfoot was just part of her world, as normal and natural as the mountains or the trees. I wondered what that would mean for her as she grew older. Would she remember this? Would she believe it was real, or would she eventually dismiss it as a dream from her infant years? I hoped she would remember. I hoped she would carry this knowledge with her, this understanding that the world contained mysteries and wonders beyond what most people believed possible. The Bigfoot continued to visit us through the spring and summer. The pattern was different now. The creature didn't come every night anymore, and it didn't always leave food. We had other sources now that the road was open and I could get to town. But the Bigfoot still checked on us regularly, still made sure we were safe. Sometimes I would find gifts that weren't food, beautifully patterned stones arranged in a circle on the porch, a collection of feathers from rare birds. Once, a small, crudely carved wooden figure that looked almost like a toy. I gave that to Lily, and it became her favorite thing. She carried it everywhere, sleeping with it clutched in her tiny hand, playing with it, talking to it in her own baby language. I had a feeling the Bigfoot had made it specifically for her, a gift from one guardian to another. As the months passed, I learned more about the creature through quiet observation. I learned that it was intelligent, far more intelligent than any animal I had ever encountered. The Bigfoot understood cause and effect. It understood our needs and anticipated them. It understood that Lily was young and vulnerable and needed extra protection. I also learned that it was patient. The creature never rushed, never acted impulsively. Everything it did was measured and deliberate. I learned that it was strong beyond belief. I once saw it from a distance, carrying a full-grown elk across its shoulders as if it weighed nothing, and I learned that it was gentle. Despite its enormous size and strength, the Bigfoot moved carefully around our cabin, never damaging anything, never making more noise than necessary, and I learned that it was lonely. I could see it in the way the creature lingered sometimes, standing at the tree line for hours, just watching us live our lives. I could hear it in the long, mournful calls it sometimes made into the night, sounds that seemed to be searching for an answer that never came. The Bigfoot was alone in these mountains, just as I had been alone before it appeared. Maybe that was part of why it had chosen to help us. Maybe it recognized in us a reflection of its own solitude. That summer, something happened that made me understand just how much danger we were in and how much we depended on the Bigfoot's protection. A group of hikers, 3 young men from the city, got lost in the mountains and ended up near my cabin. They saw Lily playing in the yard, and they saw that I was old and alone, and they decided to take advantage. They came to the door asking for water, and then they pushed their way inside. They started looking through my things, pocketing small items, their eyes greedy. One of them made a comment about how isolated we were, how no one would know if something happened out here. I was terrified. I couldn't fight them. I couldn't protect Lily from them. They were young and strong, and there were 3 of them. But then they heard something outside, a sound so deep and guttural and loud that it rattled the windows in their frames. The Bigfoot had arrived, and it was angry. The hikers ran to the window and saw the creature standing in the yard. 9 feet of fur and muscle and pure primal rage. The Bigfoot roared again, a sound that seemed to shake the very air, and took a step toward the cabin. Those young men ran like I had never seen anyone run before. They crashed through my door and sprinted down the mountain road, not even looking back, their bravado evaporating into sheer terror. The Bigfoot watched them go, making sure they were truly gone, and then it turned to look at me through the window. I nodded to the creature, a gesture of profound thanks. The Bigfoot nodded back, a slow, deliberate, and very human gesture from something that wasn't human at all, and then it melted back into the trees. I reported the incident to the police, but I left out the most important detail. I said the hikers had been spooked by something in the woods, maybe a bear. The police found the 3 men in the valley, still terrified, babbling about a monster in the mountains. Everyone assumed they had been on drugs or had suffered some kind of shared hallucination. But I knew the truth. The Bigfoot had saved us again. It had protected us from a threat I couldn't have handled on my own. After that incident, I felt even more connected to the creature. It wasn't just providing food and firewood anymore. It was actively guarding us, watching for danger, intervening when necessary. We were under the protection of something powerful and ancient and utterly devoted to our safety. Lily was 2 years old now, running and talking and full of personality. She loved the mountains, loved playing outside, loved watching for the Bigfoot every evening. She had her own name for the creature, her toddler version of the word that came out sounding like big. Every evening, she would stand at the window and call for Big, waving her little hand. And most evenings, the Bigfoot would appear at the tree line and, to my astonishment, raise one of its massive hands and wave back. The years continued to pass. My granddaughter grew from a toddler into a young child. She learned to read and write. She helped me with chores around the cabin. She became more independent every day, but she never stopped watching for Big every evening. The Bigfoot remained a constant in her life, as reliable as the sunrise, as permanent as the mountains themselves. She understood, even at 5 years old, that our situation was unusual, that other children didn't have a Bigfoot watching over them. She understood that this was something special, something secret that we needed to protect. She knew not to tell anyone about Big. I was 68 years old now. The years were catching up with me faster than I wanted to admit. I was having trouble with my knees, with my back, with my stamina, but I couldn't leave. I couldn't abandon the Bigfoot, and I couldn't take my granddaughter away from the only home she remembered. This cabin, these mountains, this impossible relationship with a creature from legend. This was our life. It was all we had and all we needed. The Bigfoot seemed to understand that I was aging. The creature started doing more around the property, taking on tasks that I could no longer handle easily. It would repair sections of fence that had fallen down. It would clear fallen trees from the path to the road. It would do heavy lifting that I could no longer manage. The Bigfoot was adapting again, stepping in to fill the gaps in my capabilities, making sure our little household continued to function. One evening that fall, something extraordinary happened. Lily was 6, playing in the yard, building something with sticks and stones. I was watching from the porch, enjoying the cool air. Then I saw the Bigfoot emerge from the tree line, earlier than usual. The creature walked toward my granddaughter, moving slowly and carefully. She looked up, saw Big approaching, and smiled. What happened next still brings tears to my eyes when I think about it. The Bigfoot knelt down next to her, making itself smaller and less intimidating. It reached out one massive, fur-covered hand and gently touched the top of her head, a gesture of obvious tender affection. She reached up and touched the creature's hand in return. They stayed like that for a long moment, a silent, profound connection passing between them. Then the Bigfoot stood up, gave her another gentle pat on the head, and walked back to the tree line. The barrier between species, between human and whatever this creature was, had dissolved in that moment. As I write this now, it has been almost 9 years since the Bigfoot first appeared in my yard on that sleet-filled night. 9 years of daily miracles, of impossible friendship, of survival against odds that should have defeated us. Lily is 9 years old, healthy and happy, preparing to start 4th grade in the small school in the valley. I am 70 years old, still alive and functional, still able to care for her despite all the challenges of age and isolation. And the Bigfoot is still here, still watching over us, still making sure we have everything we need. Last winter, the creature brought us another gift. It was a carved wooden figure, much larger and more elaborate than the toy it had given Lily years ago. This carving was of 3 figures standing together, one large, one medium, one small. The large figure was clearly the Bigfoot. The medium figure was clearly me, hunched with age, leaning on a walking stick. The small figure was clearly Lily, standing between us with her hand reaching up to touch both of us. The Bigfoot had created a sculpture of our family, our impossible, wonderful, secretive family. I don't know what the future holds. I don't know how many more years I have left, or what will happen to my granddaughter when I am gone. I don't know if the Bigfoot will always be here, but I know this much. We have been given an extraordinary gift. We have been allowed to see beyond the normal boundaries of the world. We have experienced a connection that transcends species and logic and everything we thought we knew about what was possible. The tragedy that brought my granddaughter to me was the worst thing that ever happened to our family. But what grew from that tragedy, the life we built together with our guardian from the forest, has been beautiful and precious. I would not trade these years for anything. This is where we were meant to be. This is the life we were meant to live. And this creature, this impossible, wonderful being, was meant to be part of it. This is our story. This is our truth. This is the miracle that saved us.